Hello, sports history fans. I'm Ross from the podcast Pigskin Tales. You're about to jump into another thrilling sports history moment, but first, let's dive into today's sponsor, just in time for the holiday season. Introducing Art of Words, the brainchild of word artist Dan Duffy from Philadelphia. Dan meticulously crafts stunning images by handwriting relevant words from some of the greatest sports moments in time. These unique, budget-friendly illustrations are the perfect gift, sparking cherished memories and capturing hearts. Choose from city skylines, sports, history, and musicians to find a piece for everyone. And here's the exciting part. For that sports fanatic in your life, gift them a piece of their favorite team or player's history. Art of Words tells a compelling story. Explore collegiate stadiums, each meticulously crafted with every football victory etched into words. Or venture into baseball stadiums, handwritten with every player from the team's illustrious history. My favorite on the site is Bryce Harper 2021 MVP year. Because I'm a big stats guy, I think that's one of the coolest things ever. Check it out. Don't wait. Order a print today for yourself and your loved one this holiday season. Transform your wall into a gallery of captivating art and surprise your family and friends with a print of their own. Use code SHN15 at artofwords.com for a 15% discount on your order in November and December. Visit Art of Words, where words magically transform into stunning art, evoking cherished memories and touching the hearts of those who you care about. Again, use the code SHN15 for 15% off at artofwords.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. In the epic tales of history and the circus that often is, the NFL. Betrayal rings across the timeline. Now picture this. Benedict Arnold in the 18th century. Yes, we had to use this example of all of the different ones because of my namesake. Pulls the old switcherooski, just like the Houston Texans did with Nuke Hopkins in the 21st century by trading him away to the Arizona Cardinals for what at the time seemed like pennies on the dollar. Two different eras, two different types of betrayals, but the punchline remains the same. The bitter aftertaste for fans was nothing but disloyalty. Welcome to Fantasy Football Origin Stories, where each episode is a journey back in time to explore the unique experiences of some of the coolest and most influential people in the fantasy football industry. I'm your host, Arnie Chapman, also known as the Football History Dude. Now, I love fantasy football, and I want you to come along with me to explore the yesteryear of the armchair gridiron. So hop on board my DeLorean, and let's get this baby up to 88 miles per hour. This time we stop with DeLorean. The date is March 16th, 2020. And we're anywhere in probably people's homes because this is just 3 days after President Trump declared the nationwide emergency, and many people across the nation started to work from home. Myself, I want to say it was March 13th that we all got kicked out of the office and went home. It also happens to be the date when the CDC launched Clarabot, which is a COVID symptom checker on the website. Perhaps the Texans brass should have first checked this site before they agreed to the Hopkins trade, because this is the day that they basically nuked away this week's guest fandom for the team. But as we leave you with that cliffhanger, we'll get to that later in the episode, because this week we have SC Romero to share his fantasy football origin story. I mean, he's contributed for many outlets, and we'll get into that again later in the interview, but most notably, you might know him as the PPR Show. And of course, we're going to get into this in the interview. But as we start off in the conversation, we talk about the upcoming game between the Lions and the Chargers, which we recorded this the Saturday before the 41-38 point fantasy scoring fest that was the Detroit Lions and San Diego. Man, I still say San Diego. Los Angeles Chargers game from this past week. For those of you listening in the future, it was week 10 of the 2023 season. The game ended up 41-38 on a last-second field goal. My Detroit Lions came out on top. But enough of me gloating about this and riding high, even though our defense was kind of suspect. We'll get over that pass and down the road and hopefully get a better pass rush. But let's get into the interview with SC Romero.
Yeah, no, I listened to the leak you said, and it just seems like this is football talk, A lot of it's just going with it and, just answering the questions, so it should be a fun conversation.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's where I always start off, too. So, well, I guess kind of where do you hail from, and, like, what's your, if you do have a loyalty to an NFL team, what would it be?
If I did have a loyalty to an NFL team, I mean, it was the Houston Texans, right? I'm originally from Houston. But a couple years ago when they traded DeAndre Hopkins, I was like, all right, I'm done. I'm over them. So, since then I moved to Oregon. So, I saw Justin Herbert play at Oregon. So since then, I guess I've been a fan of the Chargers, just liking him, like what he does, like him as a quarterback. So, but being a fan of fantasy football, it's been more about the players than the teams. But if I had to choose, probably the Chargers. My wife may be upset that I didn't say Seattle, but I'll say the Chargers for right now.
Well, if that's the case, so I mean, I got my little Barry Sanders coaster right here. That means this week we're enemies for tomorrow. So I'm going to have to, maybe we'll have a conversation here in a couple of days. But we'll see. That could be a fun, from a fantasy perspective, that could be a fun game tomorrow.
Agreed. It should be a good one. Herbert, I actually made a tweet about it because I have him in the Guillotine League. I picked him up for quite a bit of money in Guillotine, and he actually is the reason why I got out too. So I'm kind of upset there.
That's actually something that, let's talk about that then. So the Guillotine League, because I've heard of this numerous times, and I think I get the general concept, but for maybe the sake of, that's part of what this show is all about, is explaining different types of fantasy football, also the origin story. So what is the Guillotine League?
So we have it's an 18-team league because you play for each week. I mean, you can play at different members. It doesn't have to be 18, but really what happens is it's no head-to-head or anything like that. It's just about scoring points. So the lowest scorer each week gets cut from the league. And once they get cut, all their players drop to the free agency. So at that time, everyone that's still in the league has eligibility to bid on every player to get them to build up just basically the strongest roster. A couple years ago when the league went to 18 weeks, I switched it to add 2 more. We were doing 16, but we have basically 1,800 fab. So ideally, if you average it out, you should spend at least $100 of fab a week. But I mean, we have people, CMC went for like $1,000. So it just depends on what player is there and who wants it and if you get it. And sometimes you strike gold, and sometimes it's like, man, I didn't get anything. I spent $227 on Herbert. I think for Michael Thomas, it was like $187. Just different amounts of money for different players, and you try to build up the strongest team. And, the goal really is to spend your money wisely. Cause at the end, a couple years ago, the person that won ended up having money and the other people that were still in it, like the final 5 weeks, didn't. So he was just spending $1 on each person, just grabbing people and picking them up. And they had to wait basically to see who he didn't pick up to go after them and get them. So, it's a very strategical way of playing fantasy football because any week is your week. Anyone could go any given week just depending on performances, but it's a lot of fun. People love it. Everyone that's in the league is like so excited to play in it. Just because it adds a different element to fantasy football. You're not playing, for the team you have every, week. You're adding new players in and out. And then a couple years ago, someone started trading for fab, and that just kind of opened up a new door because people are like, oh, wait, I can give you 100 fab for someone that might be worth, 300 fab. So, just very strategical, very different. And it, as the commissioner, I hate it because I'm out, because now I'm still doing the work, but now I'm not even playing anymore. But, it's a fun league and all my league mates enjoy it.
Yeah, it's something that I've heard of it, and I thought I got the general concept, but I didn't realize, you set it up, and then, like you said, the players fall to the free agency and all that kind of thing. So I guess that's almost one of those deals where if you draft really well at the beginning, and you don't have to spend too much fab, maybe save it for the end because players will always be there. Vice versa, you could always catch back up and everything like that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that's what you try to do, right? You try to have the best draft, or at least, maneuver around to trade, trade some picks or trade some fabs early to get that high value team. But, like we talked about last week, Justin Herbert, he put up negative 0.76 points, and that's a premier quarterback. So it was very upsetting that happened because I was down and I was like, man, I've Herbert going into, Monday night. I was like, I should be good. This would be great. And now he didn't show out. So
So in a league like that, what do? Do you have bench spots still, or do you just here's your lineup and then you have to, like everybody else, goes to the free agency?
Yeah, so with it being 18 teams, we have one quarterback, one running back, two wide receivers, a tight end, and three flexes. And then we have six bench. So it's just very deep, you know. So at the very beginning, it's very deep as far as who's on your bench. You know, you may have a Devin Chain early or something like that before he popped off and everything like that. So, I mean, it's very deep there. And then as you go, you know, it builds out to it. So you do have some bench players, but, you know, there's nothing very in depth to it. It's just in case someone gets hurt, you have some leeway to go a different route.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a cool way to go play fantasy football, except for when you're out in week 1 and then you're done for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
But I guess that's why you just make it as one of your add-on leagues, not like the only league you're in and everything.
Right. So this year was actually our 4th year going into it. And the first 3 weeks, each champion from the previous year got out. So, I mean, again, it's A1's game, you know, so we were all like going crazy about it. Like, it was like, oh, you know, champion's out. So here we go. And then, oh, another champion's out. Okay, here we go. And then, you know, the third one got out. And we're like, man, there's a new champion already. And it's only week 4, you know, so it's exciting. Lots of fun, a lot of talk and trash talk and communication in it. But it's a fun league to be a part of.
Do you trade? So you said trade players and draft or fab. So it's, it's basically the same thing as like a redraft league where you're still trading players and all that type of stuff, but it's just the fact of, instead of head to head, it's you're out once you're done every week.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So you're not worried about, you know, what your opponent scores, just them, I should say. You're looking at the whole league. So even if you lose to your opponent, you're still good because, you know, when it comes down to Monday night, you're looking at, okay, who's lower than me or who do I have to beat, right? So like this past week, someone had like 90 points and I had like 77 going in with Justin Herbert. So I was like, oh, he should put up, you know, 14 points. I should beat it. And again, he put up negative, and I was like, man, that's horrible. So, didn't work out in my favor, but yeah, you're looking at the whole league in general and just, max total points, you know, lowest points scored, gets, eliminated.
I got you. Yeah. So the Guillotine League, that's not your only league. I take it, right? You're in at least one other league?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in multiple leagues. I did a Vampire League this year. That one's a little bit crazy because how it works is there's one vampire, and if you lose to that vampire, they can steal someone in your starting roster. So, for example, I lost to the vampire early on this week, and they took who was it from me? I think it was Travis Kelce maybe from me, but they ended up trading him for like, you know, Jonnu Smith. Maybe that's not that bad considering the years Jonnu Smith had, but they can trade him for anyone. Basically, you just had to give it to them. So that one's a hard league. I'm in dynasty leagues, campus to Canton leagues, CFF leagues. You know, you name it, I'm probably playing in it.
Oh yeah, you are all over the gamut as far as types of fantasy. What about now? This is the whole origin story part of the show. Here we go, the DeLorean. You get to go back in time and everything. What about like going back to your first memory of fantasy football, or maybe like the first league, if you remember playing in the first league?
Yeah, no, the first league was in 2007, I think. So it was my cousin's league. His older brother had, you know, started the league and everything. So he's asked, you know, to play. I was like, yeah, sure. I'll try it out. It was, you know, pencil and paper. We had our draft board, pencil and paper, writing down all our picks. It was a lot of fun. And I had the 107. And in 2007, my first pick was Ronnie Brown. And my other cousin, he was a huge Miami Dolphins fan, and he had 108. And as soon as I picked Robbie Brown, he was like, you're going to regret that pick. I promise you. Well, come to find out, week 7 was the year that Ronnie Brown like broke his leg or something. So I ended up just demolishing my whole team, and I blamed him for it because I was like, man, you kind of cursed me on there. You know, that's all your fault. And he was like, no, you shouldn't have drafted him. But, you know, it was again a fun time. But I just remember that very specifically. As soon as I drafted him, he was like, you're going to regret that. I promise you. And I was upset. But I mean, it is the game of the, you know, it's the name of the game there. But that was my very first draft pick, Ronnie Brown. I think also in that time area, I had Larry Fitzgerald later on, you know, maybe had, Tom Brady, you know, when he was still with the Patriots and stuff like that. So a lot of different players there. But yeah, that was a fun league, pencil and paper, you know, writing them down. You know, and I kind of miss that because now everything's just done through, you know, the phone and drafting like that. But if you can get a league together where you're all just, you know, writing it down, pencil and paper, have your draft board, I definitely recommend it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's something we talk about on here quite a bit with everyone. Like the in-person draft is way better than online and everything. Do you have any like fumbles when it came to that? Like, you know, like a story of a mispick or, you know, put the wrong name on the board or anything like that kind of jumps to mind?
At that league, no. I mean, that was a while ago that I don't remember my full draft. Any kind of like fumbles or anything. No, I can't think of anything specifically. I know in my first couple drafts, you know, before I started getting the hang of it, I was choosing like a defense, like the Ravens defense in like round 4, you know, cause I was like, oh, I just want to get the top defense here or something like that. So, I don't do that anymore. You know, I don't draft the defense in round 4. I'll wait till, you know, the later rounds now, but that was probably, the biggest, mistakes I did early on was drafting the defense. And then I think I got, you know, a kicker, you know, Adam Vinatieri or something like that early too, just cause I was like, oh yeah, why not? He's going to put up points, you know, but, don't draft them early, you know, wait till you get your kickers and your defenses later. Those were probably my biggest hiccups, you know, at the beginning stages of my fantasy career.
I remember one time, and I can't remember who the other name would have been, but I was in an auction league, and it wasn't on but I actually accidentally put up D Johnson thinking it was David Johnson, but it was some other D Johnson, like a backup running back. And then they got bid way up, and, you know, everybody called me like, oh, you did that on purpose, but I actually did it. I didn't do it on purpose. I just happened to accidentally fill it up there as the name. So yeah, that would have been a blunder for the other people, I guess, like that. It kind of leads me to the question where I'm like, hey, a blunder, and this is what it is. Like, what if you could take that DeLorean back in time and a mulligan moment or like a redo, like a trade or a draft pick or whatever? Not the Ronnie Brown. You already kind of told us that one. But what else? What other trade would you redo or something like that?
So a few years ago, I traded I traded DK Metcalf, and I can't remember who the other person in the trade was, for Daniel Jones and like I don't know, it was some slot receiver. I couldn't even tell you who it was, but the big deal was I traded DK Metcalf for Daniel Jones. It was a 2 quarterback league, and I was just super stoked on Daniel Jones. And granted, he came out last year, but it's just like it hasn't worked out in my favor. I should have kept DK, and this was my first dynasty it was an IDP dynasty league, and it was, you know, we're 5 years into it now, so that was probably my biggest trade that I was like, man, I kind of regret moving that piece, because DK Metcalf has been looking great, and Daniel Jones had a great year, but now torn ACL, and he just hasn't been the quarterback I wanted him to. But in that regard, recently I traded him and the first overall pick of this last year's draft for basically Bijan, for Patrick Mahomes. There's other pieces involved in that, but it was Daniel Jones' first overall pick, another first, and I think it was Devontae Smith for Garrett Wilson and Daniel Jones, or the Garrett Wilson and Patrick Mahomes, I think. So yeah, so I mean, it worked out. You know, you gotta make your moves. You lose some, you win some. You know, but that was at that time I made the mistake of trading that because DK Metcalf went off and Daniel Jones did not.
Heck, you kind of like led into the next one too. I like to ask. So you kind of gave the what would you do differently, but what about like your, I don't know, if you had a highlight reel of all your fantasy football career, like what would be like the top 3 moments in your life or something like that, your fantasy football career?
So a couple years ago, I made a trade for Kenyon Drake, when he went off for the Arizona Cardinals in the second week. And I traded I think it was like DeAndre Hopkins and James Conner or something like that for Kenyon Drake. And people were like, oh, that's a dumb trade. Ended up winning the league. So, you know, jokes on them. But you know, you gotta take your risk. You know, I'm a firm believer in, you know, don't necessarily need to win every trade. Sure, you will make every trade as even as possible, but sometimes if the opponent sees as an L, but you can see a possible future, like a high risk, high reward, I'm all about that, you know. So that move was a big move, but I needed a running back, and I, you know, realized Kenyon Drake had the opportunity to get traded, and he wasn't. It was when he was still with the Dolphins, I believe, and then he got traded to the Cardinals, you know, during the season, and then he ended up being the starting and, you know, leading the way for the Cardinals. So that was a big risk move where I didn't know the outcome of it, but the risk paid off, Another one was a dynasty I'm in now where we're 4 years in strong. At the very beginning, I drafted, Dalvin Cook and Josh Allen before Josh Allen went off. And everyone's like, oh, that was a dumb pick. Why would you do that? All that kind of stuff. And then I ended up trading Cooper Kupp for David Johnson and, there's other Texans running back. I think it was D Johnson too, but I don't remember the first name. But I ended up trading Cooper Kupp for them, and as bad as that was that year, it was better trading for David Johnson. That was the year that David Johnson did outproduce Cooper Kupp. So again, it was like dynasty. You got to kind of think ahead as well. So maybe trading Cooper Kupp wasn't the greatest idea, but at that same time, that year I won the championship. So it was kind of like jokes on them. And they actually wanted to veto that trade for me because they're like, you're making a horrible mistake and stuff like that. And I was like, man, it's my team. Like, it's what I want to do. And again, jokes on them because I ended up winning that league. So that was a great one for me. And then let's see, another fun here. Those would be the two biggest highlights that I can think of right now out of it. And I guess just when I win a championship, every time I win, I kind of tear it all down and I try to rebuild. So I think that's just a fun highlight for me in general for every team. It's like in Dynasty too, a lot of people get their guys and like, oh, I'm gonna ride in year and out. And I'm like, yeah, that's fun. I guess that's the point of Dynasty, right? To win multiple championships. But I'm like, it's hard to rebuild, right? So I want it all. Now let's trade everyone else and try to build up a different team and try to win again. And that's where I'm in the process in now.
Yeah, so you're constantly on the move, always trying to see what you can do for the future in your dynasty. Speaking of futures, now it's going to be the opposite, though. We're going to take that DeLorean again back in time. This is why you came on the show, for your fantasy football origin story. So take us back to when you're like, hey, I kind of like this thing. I'm playing fantasy football, but I want to be a contributor, all the way to now your pinnacle being on fantasy football origin stories.
Yeah. So when I said 2007, that was a fun year for me. It was with family and friends, and it's like, okay, I kind of like this. And, that was through the ESPN app and stuff like that. And, started playing it even more and getting more in depth, and then started realizing I was watching the game more as far as looking at specific players, figuring out what they're doing, looking at schemes. I was looking at a different element of the game there. And it was, 4 years ago now when I actually started doing like content, and it really came out from me watching the fantasy footballers or listening to the fantasy footballers. They were huge part of my success, just listening to them and how they rank players and things like that. And one thing they kept saying was, we started by just talking about our league of record and just having the league of records. So at that time, when I joined my first or second dynasty at that point, I asked the guys in there like, hey, this looks like a very competitive league. I would love to talk about this league and just randomly, talk about it and really just not really have a specific goal in mind. I just I love football. I want to bring y'all on. Let's talk some football. Let's, just talk about what we do in this league to try to be better and try to make it better. And so with that being said, that's when it kind of all started. It started clicking. And at that point, I started looking into more, content creators and just seeing what they're doing. And it kind of led to one thing to another to where I am now. And just, started writing articles and just started being more in depth, looking more into specific features, possible trades, possible rumors, possible, targets, when players are coming back, if I just try to buy low, sell high, things like that. And now, it's kind of led me to this platform that I have now and just networking and being around so many, creative people that it's kind of, helped me just grow within the community because, people are coming to me asking me for start sit advice. And, don't get me wrong, I'm not getting every pick right, but, I have that knowledge now where it's like I am doing that extended research to give you the best answer I can. And again, it depends. Sometimes your players don't do that great, but again, it's all part of the game. And I'm very excited just to be a part of the content creating network because it goes a long way. And I love football. Just talking football. My biggest thing on wanting to start it was I can talk football for hours like we're doing now. So why not get it recorded? Why not have it on the platform? And guess what? If it kicks off and does something, great. If not, it's still a natural hobby of mine where I just enjoy doing it.
Yeah, and that leads us into the PPR show. So what is a PPR show?
So it started off with, players, projections, and rankings, the PPR, right? So it was all about just giving my personal favorite players, my projections, and some of my rankings there for it. And it's led into multiple things here now. SC Romero is, my name here, and it's just like what I just want to bring to concept my light, and I like to defer my rankings from not necessarily going with consensus. I see a lot of very similar rankings across the board, and I feel I don't necessarily go with consensus all the time. Don't get me wrong, I do with some players, but at the same time, sometimes I try to look outside the box. If someone's looking at a specific person, for example, you have Drake May coming in this year from North Carolina. A lot of people have him as the QB2. Right now, he's my quarterback 5. I just haven't seen the same tangibles as some people have said. So looking from a different perspective, looking at different reasons why, okay, if I see someone as like a quarterback 2 across the board, I'm like, wait, there has to be something that doesn't fit. Like, why is everyone saying this? Yes, this makes sense, but at the same time, what's a reason why he can't be, or why isn't this guy up there? And so I try to look at different views with it for it. Projections are always tough and hard to come across, but I try to get my best idea of projections for them. And that's I do an IDP start sit article for RPO football, so just trying to give ideas in different ways for people to look at that they may not get from other responses, because everyone else is just saying what is common, I guess you can say.
So is this a rhetorical question when I asked you, was it a play on the letters with the acronym PPR on purpose, or did it just kind of fall that way?
It was kind of just on purpose. I was trying to think of a name for like a show to do. And I started doing my own thing for it to create YouTubes, and now I'm just more active on X now than anything. But it's kind of just I wanted to find something that resonated with not only fantasy football. So you have, football as in points per reception, right? So that was a huge shift, because when I first started playing, you didn't get points per reception at all. It was just, based on yards and touchdowns. So once it started going, I was like, well, this is actually, the way fantasy football is going. So I wanted to play something that connected fantasy football. When you saw it, you're like, okay, this has to be a fantasy football show. But I didn't want it to mean points per reception. So I was like, okay, let's try to think of an acronym for it. And I was like, players, projections, and rankings. Okay, that's all something I could talk about here. So that actually makes it fit well, because when you see PPR, if you're a fantasy football player, you think about like, okay, this is I'm looking for points per reception, right? But if you go into more in depth, it's actually talking about things I will cover in that specific segment, or just on random shows that I may do.
Okay, so and that was the first thing I thought too, was when I saw PPR point per reception. So it like stuck in my mind. Oh, that's obviously a fantasy football show. When you see the word PPR show. But what about, okay, maybe you're not you kind of mentioned earlier with your rankings, you don't follow the consensus necessarily, or you're not like just here cookie cutter, print and paste kind of thing. Mm-hmm. What would be either maybe a unique perspective, or maybe your superpower? There we go. What's your fantasy superpower? Like, what are you really good at? Some people are really good at drafting kickers. Some people are good at quarterbacks. But what are you good at giving advice, or your top?
I've really came strong in this space with IDP, looking at a different perspective from IDP, which is individual defensive player. So I think I've been doing pretty good at that as far as understanding defenses and schemes and what players can do. Tackles is a huge part of it, but also interceptions. So seeing specific matchups. And really, I want to say, wide receivers. I've been big on getting the right receivers and knowing who can hit and who may not. A lot of people had Trey Burks as one of the top wide receivers, when he came out, and I was like, I don't really know about him. Justin Jefferson, I was interested in him. I didn't necessarily say he was a top receiver, but I was like, man, we had to watch out for him. So, looking at specific wide receivers, looking at their techniques, their, separation and things like that. And all of it comes down to, if the NFL team actually uses them. But I think I hit on a lot of my wide receivers that I talk about, because I'm not necessarily looking at, their overall talent is big, but I'm actually breaking it down. Like, okay, how do they get off the line? How are they doing on the route running? Is it crisp? Is it more fluid? Can they catch at the high point? Are they able to gain that separation needed to get a couple of yards to give that cushion for the quarterback? More times than not, I feel I do hit when it comes to your wide receivers, and that's probably my strongest suit. My weakest would probably be Probably be the running backs. I'm heavy on some big running backs. Jerome Ford, was my RB5 when he came out. So I mean, I'm glad he's getting the shot now because now everyone's like, oh, Jerome Ford, he should be on your lineup and stuff like that. I'm like, man, I've talked about him if he gets the shot, and that's one thing with football too. A lot of people, or not, I would say a lot, but some people say they fail if their guys didn't hit right out the gate. And sometimes it takes a couple years. Jerome Ford's one of those keys where I think he is one of the better running backs. He was explosive when I saw him come out. He was a big, kind of bulky little running back that can kind of maneuver through the line and everything. And now we're actually seeing that because he's getting the opportunity. So sometimes we just need to wait for that opportunity to knock, to see the success we think the players can have.
You seem to come from a position of, not just repeating things, but knowledge of the game itself. Did you play growing up?
I played a little bit in high school. It wasn't anything that I pursued necessarily at the college level or anything like that, but I did play a little bit in high school, but really, it just came down to loving it. My first NFL game that I remember watching was the Super Bowl with the Rams versus the Titans, and just the excitement there. And I remember, being with family and just enjoying that game. Huge fan of Madden, started playing Madden a lot more. And then, it was like, this is a big deal, right? And then, it just kind of led to one thing. I just saw this was an avenue to learn more about the game, again, because I wasn't focused on one team. Growing up, my family was all Cowboys fans, so I was a Texans fan. When I started actually registering, this is, how football is. But then, realizing there's more than just one team. I was focusing on just one team and I wanted to just broaden my knowledge on the game. So this allowed me to do it because I was trying to look at more options for these players and seeing exactly what they can do on the team. And it kind of just expanded me to say, okay, I need to be looking more into depth on the Giants wide receivers core. Who do they have with Daniel Jones? Will this lead to him having some sort of success? I thought Jalen Hyatt would help with it, but they're not necessarily utilizing him. So, there's multiple avenues that I took that kind of got me to where I am here. But just being a fan of the game in general, I love playing it. I'm probably older enough now where I'm not necessarily trying to, cause I'll like pull my leg or something like that. Right. But, when I was in my youth, it was fun, getting back with some friends and playing, on the street, some street ball or anything like that. So yeah, just a huge fan of the game. Love the concept. Love, these athletes, they're talented athletes. So just seeing what they can do on the field week in and week out is amazing to me.
Yeah. No, I mean, just the way that you talk about it is just you have a different. What's the best word I want to use? Almost like an announcer. Like you could probably be an announcer if you wanted to. Like the way that you break down the plays and the move and stuff. You could be that guy that you might maybe have the color guy with you that was the former player, and you're the one breaking it down and such. They created the separation, the high point, and all that kind of thing. Where do we want to go now with it? Let me go to my cheat sheet here. I kind of got off track a little bit. Oh, earlier you mentioned RPO football, that you write some IDP articles for them. Like, let's give some love to RPO football, but then also any other outlets that you might, contribute to.
Yeah, so RPO football is ran by Master IDP Leo, who was the top ranker, I believe, for Fantasy Pros for IDP rankings last season. He's doing great this season as well, and he was looking for a writer, and I reached out. He's been a great mentor to me to just get further into that IDP space. So I do different articles on there for the NFL side, but then I also work with Dynasty Pros. We do a Devi show every Tuesday and Wednesday, and Devi is just Devi or C2C, Campus to Canton, is involving the college players. So if you play Dynasty, it's about, you have your NFL team and then every year you have a rookie draft. Well, Devi and C2C allows you to have those college players on rosters already. So Devi, they don't get points for it. It's just kind of like a stash for you that when they get drafted, they automatically go to your roster. C2C is we have a college roster and we have an NFL roster. So every time your college players get drafted, they automatically go to your NFL side. And then whoever wasn't necessarily on a college roster team, you can still do a rookie draft. It's just, picking up from that draft pool. But we do a Devi show every Tuesday and Thursday there, but I also do some IDDP articles for them, which is for me, individual defensive Devi players. So just again, diving further into the IDP concept. And I don't see a lot of that when you think about Devi articles. It's mostly talking about the the offensive side. So I wanted to bring to light, okay, well, these defensive guys will make big moves, and IDP is kind of a growing market, if you will, for the fantasy football community. So I wanted to bring more to light to that. And then recently I joined High Point Creators Network. It's 32 individuals, including myself, that cover each specific team. So I'm covering the Los Angeles Rams. So really it's just trying to connect more so with the players and fantasy football. Apparently there's a mindset that, actual football players know what fantasy football is. And a lot of them do not, so bringing to light the concept of, hey, if like the person that's covering the Bengals has Joe Burrow, we want Joe Burrow to know, hey, he's the first overall pick in all these leagues. We want him to be excited about that. Like, look, these are all your followers. They think you're going to have some great success and stuff like that. So, just trying to connect further, the player with the actual game of fantasy football. But that's been a fun, network to be a part of, just because it's so many talented people coming together, talking about teams. And it's not necessarily a fandom or anything. I mentioned I was a fan of the Texans or Chargers, but it's kind of bringing us to light, like, okay, we have to talk about these other teams and try to bring to light the positive of these teams, even if they're struggling, right? So that's been a very fun part of me for it as well.
You kind of led into a little bit there with like what you'd like to see. Maybe we'll call it the industry shift or whatever, the perspective shift, and then some of the different types of fantasy football games. But what about now taking that DeLorean to the future? We'll call it just 5 years. What would you predict how something's going to be different in the fantasy football space, or something that you'd like to see kind of shift towards that in the future?
I think IDP. I think that's a growing part of, you still have a lot of leagues that play full defensive teams, which is okay. And that's a lot of fun. But IDP, you have individual defensive players on your team, right? So it means you're not just drafting the Ravens defense, but you're grabbing Roquan Smith. You're actually getting Deontay Banks from the Giants, or you're getting Darius Slay from the Eagles. Plus you're getting, Joey Bosa from the Chargers. So you're actually getting individual defensive players, and they have points just as your offensive players have points, as far as like points for receptions or yards or touchdowns. Your defensive players do it on tackles, forced fumbles recovered, interceptions. So I think that's something that's growing in the market. And I think it's more so because people want more, they just want to try to evolve it more. And this just kind of expands even further knowledge. In one of my leagues, we've talked about trying to get IDP, but one guy's been hesitant on it because he's saying, like, this is something that's going to be very, time consuming as far as, researching these knowledge and seeing what these guys are doing. Now, it's easy doing it the offensive side because it's natural at this point, but now you want me to, go into do some research and film study on defensive guys, which goes a different level. But I see that as a growing industry. And I think 5 years from now, that may be a platform or a staple into what a fantasy football league should be. And I say that right now because I think there's still uncertainty. There's not really a general basis on scoring for IDP. So I'm in multiple different leagues, and none of them are the exact same as far as scoring. So I think in 5 years from now, we may have a general concept of, okay, this should be your standard scoring for it. I think that's something we'll continue to grow to in the future.
So you've brought up IDP numerous times in this episode. How about let's shift and say, this is a very open-ended question, so take it as you will, but a tip or a trick for someone that wants to jump into this IDP landscape, like when they're like, so for next year, like a tip or a trick for someone that wants to become an IDP member.
Tackles are probably your biggest thing. So generally your linebackers are your top scorers. So you want to try to get a heavy linebacker first. If it's offensive and IDP, unless you're getting one of the top linebackers, you may not need to get them to like round 8. You still will fill out your offensive scoring, and that goes to go with, we don't have a general synopsis of what scoring should look like for IDPs. So a lot of times your offensive players will score more, but your tackles mean a lot. So I think your linebackers are your key positions. The good starting point could be 2 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, 2 defensive backs, and 2 IDP players, which are basically your flex, because you can plug in any defensive player there. But I would say your tackles are your biggest part. So you're probably going to be focusing on your linebackers or even your dual threat players. So your guys that can be a defensive lineman or a linebacker. So like Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa kind of fall in those categories where they could be lined up on the line, or they could be standing up on the outside as a linebacker spot there as well. So just remember, tackles mean a lot. Sacks mean a lot too, but those are so far in between where you're not necessarily getting those every time. So you want to try to look for the tackles because that, to me, is your guaranteed point. So if you get someone that averages 7 tackles per game, you probably got a stud there.
Okay, so then now as we close out, last words of wisdom for the listener of the show that likes your journey, and they're like, "Oh, that's kind of cool. I'm the same way. I watch football. I grew up. I fell in love with it. It's a passion, and now I want to get into the space." Like, what kind of words of wisdom would you give to them, or mentor them right there?
Don't be afraid to take the risk. I think a big part in it is you always want to try to win the trade, but sometimes you have to lose the trade right now to win later and be okay with that. I'm in a lot of leagues where players are like, I can't make that trade because this, and that. And it's like, okay, man, but sometimes you have to think about the future. And I get a lot of criticism for some of my trades I do. And it's like, hey, to me, that fit what I was thinking about. So do what you feel is best for your team. Don't look at what everyone else is doing, or don't even compare market value, I guess. So if you're trading a wide receiver for a first, but then you see another wide receiver go for 2 firsts or whatever it may be, don't feel down on yourself. You did what you did for your team. And guess what? Everyone has different values, and not everybody's worth the first. I mean, I said that right there where, you got different people getting different amount of first there. Not everyone is worth the first. And when you think about that mentally, and this is for a dynasty perspective, because you have, rookie draft picks. When you think about that, I feel you'll win more because you'll be able to trade your value for some different players and get better value in the long run. So, dynasty, you're thinking about the league right now, but you're also thinking about the future. And no, sometimes you have to take the L right now to win in the future as well.
There you go. Man, sometimes you just got to take that L now so you can get that W in the long run. And adapting that phrase to a different meaning, well, simply put, patience, baby. It could take you a long way in life, as well as it can, potentially, maybe, sometimes, in your fantasy football career. Speaking of patience, though, I want to thank you for listening all the way through to the end of this interview. And if you have any suggestions to make the show even better, reach out at any time. You can find me on Twitter X over at FHDude, which stands for Football History Dude, my original podcast, or just head to the website at fantasyfootballoriginstories.com. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through. Thank you for listening to this episode of Fantasy Football Origin Stories. To make sure you're the first to get the next episode, please make sure to mash that little subscribe or follow button on your podcast player of choice, then head over to the website for the show notes and more fantasy football origin stories. That's at fantasyfootballoriginstories.com. And remember, dudes, where we're going, we don't need roads. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by to listen to another episode here on the Sports History Network. Our podcasters are passionate about uncovering and sharing sports stories from yesteryear. And if you didn't know it already, we have over 30 shows across the network covering all sorts of sports history topics. In fact, here's a glimpse into one of our awesome podcasts here on the network.
The Pigskin Tales podcast is all about the lesser-known pro football players. Yes, there are stories about the ones we know, like Brad Tarkenton and Harold Red Grange. But have you ever heard of Ernie Nevers? How about Dave Osborne or even Grady Alderman? These men created their own path to the NFL. How did they do it? Listen to the Pigskin Tales podcast, now streaming on your favorite music platform. Go to pigskintales.com.
How about that? I bet you're super hyped to go listen to that new podcast, right? Well, to learn about this show and all the other podcasts on the network, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Head over there today to find your next favorite sports history podcast.